Hi, I'm Tony Higgins from Blueprint. In this segment, we're going to talk about the business impacts of poor requirements, how IT software requirements can negatively and materially impact a business. To start with, I'm going to look at some statistics, the facts, if you will. The average project, this was reported in a recent study by Oxford University, the average project goes 45% over budget. That's an IT software project. And from Standish Group, 43% of features delivered are in fact never ever used by the end user community, which is truly staggering. Also, for a requirements error that's detected and remedied in the early part of the life cycle, let's say it costs $70, that same requirement would cost in excess of $14,000 if you were to try to fix that later in the cycle during operation, for example. And that's reflected in this curve over here. The later you go in a software development life cycle, even to the point where you transition into operation, the costs increase exponentially. Now, that also, of course, could afford us an opportunity. If we did have a way to remedy this situation, to detect errors earlier, they would come down that cost curve at the same rate. So you could look at it as a negative. We are certainly feeling the effects of this, but it could also be turned around into an opportunity as well if you're able to pull this back. Another statistic, 32% of delivered defects are actually due to requirements. This came from a study from Capers-Jones. And what that means is if we have an application that goes into operation and we look at the total number of requirements defects, about a third of them actually have been shown to originate way back up in the requirements phase. The issue is they transition through the entire life cycle and they're only detected once in operation. So once again, if we could pull this forward, this detection point, and actually find it earlier, even right at just after the point it was introduced, we basically backtrack down this curve to the point where we can function at lower cost, significantly lower cost. The reason we have such an impact, when you look at the software lifecycle and just look at the sheer number of artifacts that we're dealing with, we start out with a set of business objectives. So let's say we have 10, 15 pretty high-level business objectives. As we proceed through the life cycle in terms of definition, these objectives transition into needs and business requirements and so on, all the way down to system requirements. And we get down there, we have a whole lot more artifacts, let's say numbering in the hundreds or maybe even thousands. Number of design artifacts increases still, amount of code, and amount of testing artifacts when you consider all the test plans, all the test scripts, where we have to have many test scripts and test cases to actually validate all the possibilities surrounding requirements or the various scenarios around requirements. It really does increase to a staggering number of artifacts that we're dealing with on a software project. So if we do have an error that was introduced quite early, the impacts of that are very broad indeed when you think of all the downstream artifacts. And that's really is what's driving this curve exponentially increasing. Once again, if we're able to detect this very shortly after, the number of impacted artifacts are quite small, and of course the cost is correspondingly small as well. So it behooves us to really try to be proactive and prevent errors in requirements, but where they do get introduced, we at least want to be able to detect them early. What's also interesting is that 50%, this is from a recent survey that we did across a number of webinars looking at the audience, 50% have responded saying they use documents and spreadsheets. Tools never ever designed to do the work of requirements definition and management. They're trying to use documents and spreadsheet to handle the large volume of information and to do the tasks that a BA has to do around defining and managing requirements. What's really interesting is that a significant amount of them, the majority in fact in the respondents, say they don't have any immediate plans to change what they're doing. In essence, they're going to continue living at the high end of that curve. Now this problem is not new. This has been around an awfully long time, of course, but what is changing and trending upward are the consequences. largely because businesses are increasingly running more and more and more on software to the point where the business is the software in some very large online retailers, for example. And what that means is that not to address this issue surrounding risk is now becoming a business problem, and a significant business problem. Introducing business risk, limiting a business's ability to be agile, to respond to shifts in market demand, for example, and competition, and of course affecting the bottom line in terms of corporate performance. So there are ways to remedy this. As I pointed out, documents and spreadsheets are one of the biggest issues surrounding requirements today and limiting our ability to have good requirements. Modern technology like Blueprint, for example, where we take heavily textual requirements and make them visual in terms of graphical models and be able to simulate them, a prototype, really tends to expose and drive out errors from the software development process.